Thank you, Christoph, Knowbotiq, and Rohit. As someone who doesn't know too much about Switzerland, this was an extremely instructive panel for me, especially in terms of its contemporaneity and also the tension that was there amongst the three presentations. I would say I could possibly speak for a large number of people in this room that when Rohit was talking about the exoticizing of India within Switzerland, we have to admit that, for most of our lives, our erotic imagination has been entirely governed by Switzerland because of Yash Chopra. And whenever I think about, conjugal bliss, an image of Sri Devi sashaying in a chiffon sari in Zurich is exactly what comes to mind. So in some ways, I think Switzerland, even though despite its neutrality in all the wars, has always been the victim of celluloid violence. And for the longest time, I mean, the idea of Switzerland's relationship to creativity has been governed by this famous scene from Orson Welles and Joseph Cotton's encounter in The Third Man, where Welles and Orson and Cotton are on a giant wheel. And, essentially, Cotton has gone there to look for the missing man, the third man. Eventually finds Orson Welles to be the kingpin of a big criminal syndicate. And they have this big dialogue about, morality, crime, action, etc. And Orson Welles looks at Cotton and says, for thousands of years, the Italians had violence, they had bloodshed, they had revolutions, and they produced Raphael, they produced the Renaissance, they produced Michelangelo. And for thousands of years, Switzerland had peace and quiet. What did they produce? The cuckoo clock. Right? This idea of the relationship in a way between conflict and creativity was something that I saw and sensed as a tension running through. Because if on the one hand, a country on the verge of dealing with the question of multiculturalism and multicultural citizenship, what are the roots that you would imagine between, in a way, political action and creative action in encountering and confronting the difficult questions of race and identity? And I saw the tension lying on two ends because, on the one hand, if Christoph's presentation, in a way, was about the idea of what it may mean to engage within a liberal conception of multicultural citizenship, which is about inclusivity, but an inclusivity that may at some level rely on a certain idea of a translation of identity into sameness, right? And this question of what that sameness might be underpins the relationship that we imagine between art and politics. Because if the idea of the liberal consensual social contract is underwritten by artistic practice, then does art run into the danger of becoming governmentalized and becoming the cultural notary, as it were, of the social contract? And this is something that I saw as being, in a way, in tension with what Christian brought up, which is really a question of what we would imagine a slightly more agonistic imagination of art and politics to be, where if one is not relying in a way on the presumption of participation, but really on questions of what you have described as forms of withdrawal, what might be the relationship that emerges in a more agonistic conception of politics? And here, if one were to think about the idea of how cognate these terms are between agonistics on the one hand and aesthetics on the other, then what is this agonistics that would emerge? If the danger of a multicultural citizenship in a way kind of rests in the possibility that it becomes a pedagogic project in which, the idea of art as forms of kind of, cultural or cultural citizenship, which is really about being ingrained and being taught, then what are the possibilities that this form of agonistic kind of, participation would open for us? And here, one of the common ingredients I found in the two presentations was this word transparency. Both of you talked about projects that dealt with the question of transparency. And I think that here is an interesting question about how we can think about a political vocabulary based on the sensible, but which is acutely aware of its various minute differences. What, for example, is the difference between transparency, opacity, legibility, and visibility? If one of the dangers, in a way, in a post-informationalized world is the question of rendering everyone legible, especially via the operation of databases, then is the right to retain one's opacity a critical challenge in thinking about multicultural citizenship, that one is not rendered legible in any manner? And what kind of a claim might that be? In Nabokov's invitation to a beheading, the protagonist is sentenced to jail precisely because he refuses to be legible. And for me, that agonistic kind of stance of the retention of one's enigma as the retention of one's sovereignty or autonomy becomes a crucial challenge. In Rohit's presentation, I had a couple of questions that I wanted to pick up on. You spoke about the anniversary of the Friendship Treaty. And I found this to be rather intriguing because when one thinks about friendships between nations, you're really looking at, in some ways, the only way that you can commemorate that and memorialize that is, of course, through, celebrating anniversaries of treaties. But what if one were to imagine the possibilities of another kind of politics that's based on the imagination of friendship? And here what I have in mind is Leela Gandhi's very important work on the affective politics of anti-colonialism, where she traces out a whole range of sites which one would not normally, think of in relation to the political. She looks, for example, at the relationship or the friendship between C.F. Andrews and Gandhi. She looks at the relationship or the solidarity that the vegetarians in England had for India. And she also looks at the entire queer relationship in terms of, queer movements that supported or were kind of anti-colonial in their politics. And here we have a very different imagination, in a way, of a friendship that is not about the celebration of friendship between countries in the way that you critiqued it, as much as it is a friendship that becomes, in a way, an anti-nationalist stance. And the example that she cites is of E.M. Forster saying that, if I had to choose between betraying my country and betraying my friend, I pray to God that I have the courage to betray my country. This is a really, really crucial kind of imagination because it allows us to think about what that might mean precisely on the site of this cultural encounter that you talk about. If the experience of, let's say, yoga or of Bollywood is an experience of cultural difference, is there a possibility that this experience might have any potential beyond, an orientalized, exoticized encounter with, difference? Is there, in other words, the possibility of a self-estrangement that arises from someone's encounter with, a cultural artifact or with culture more generally in terms of something that completely disorients you? And the one story that I wanted to share with you from Leela Gandhi on this was an example that she gives of an Australian woman who marches up to a refugee center with a poster and a placard which says, "You're not alone." But much before she actually reaches there, she is caught by the police and she is taken away. So the people in the center don't even ever see her. Her protest is not really registered in any kind of significant manner in terms of symbolic act. But yet at the same time, the very fact of her being picked up, being hauled violently into the car, and being taken away renders her, for that brief moment, an alien, in a way that her citizenship is suspended and she's treated much like other aliens would be. And Leela Gandhi asking what this might mean in terms of this surplus sociality that propels such a political act says or names it the anti-colonial politics of friendship. So what are the possibilities then in terms of the relationship between the kind of anti-racist work that you do with the possibilities of a friendship that's grounded in a cultural encounter that is not reducible to the exotic? The last point that I just wanted to make on the presentation that was made by knowbotiq is on this question of withdrawal. The question of withdrawal is something that I've also been thinking a little bit about, particularly in terms of, if the political is the name of a certain kind of a call to action, right? The name, and Geetanjali's presentation in the morning talked about that, in terms of what this idea of how radical contemporary art might be. So if the political is always the naming of a certain mode of what is to be done, what does the idea of withdrawal then mean? And here what I have in mind is Shannon Mariotti's work on Thoreau and the politics of withdrawal, where she claims that Thoreau's withdrawal from public life and from the political sphere was not a nihilistic rejection of the world of the political as much as it was an effort to reimagine the very basis of the political. By immersing himself within a form of life, namely a certain kind of a relationship to nature, Thoreau was asking us what it may mean to completely renew rather than to reform the language of the political. And in this sense, I think that the linkages that I saw running across the presentations was really about the question of what it might mean to think not so much in terms of a multicultural citizenship that binds, as much as the imagination of something that unbinds. Agamben suggests that the real basis, in a way, of the state is not in the social contract or in the social bond, as much as in the prohibition against the undoing of that bond. And the running theme around all your three presentations is how and where do we draw the line between consent and withdrawal in our imagination of the relationship between art and politics. So thank you for that.
Hi, my name is Bharti and I'm an art critic. Maybe it's the evening and I've run out of patience a little bit. Or maybe it's really difficult to follow up on Sainath's presentation. But I did feel like this panel did not necessarily present clear-cut issues. So for example, Rohit, your presentation, I mean, I felt your examples were too few. For example, you talked about Bollywood, which is a very sort of general, sweeping statements on Yash Chopra and the saris and all of that. We know that. You talked about one example of a girl who used yoga to get away from her family. Which Indian girl doesn't want to get away from her family? But I'm a diaspora from West Africa, and what you presented is exactly what I could have presented about growing up in a place where you are the minority and where there is racism. And the word you did not use is xenophobia. And I was not very clear about whether you were just being specific about Indians or were you addressing South Asian diaspora in Switzerland on the whole. So if you could clarify that, that would be lovely. And the other issue I see about performance art, it's, to me, when I write about art from Southeast Asia and performance being a key conceptual component, performance art in the public sphere is meant to be dangerous due to its unpredictability, because you're in the public. Anything could happen, and that is what gives it the edge. But maybe I don't know enough about Switzerland, and I'm thinking, what's the point in having a performance art in an environment that is tolerant and safe to an extent? What point was the performance artist trying to make in disrupting, was it an office or a bank? And we're not even beginning to talk about Switzerland as a capital of money laundering and corruption. So, I don't know. Help me figure out what your presentation was about.
Not help really, but some clarification. Christoph, on your presentation, I was just curious about what kind of monitoring and evaluation approaches you had post your project, and how did you evaluate the impact of what you were trying to do with the artists, and how was the connection drawn with how it impacted the community? Maybe a bit about that. And Rohit, with what you said, I was just curious about this relationship of bilateral conversation between India and, of course, Switzerland, and how was it impacted by the global conversations that are going on, whether it's with UNESCO or EU, and the focus on diversity from then on. And I mean, you spoke about it in a two-lens structure of the friendship between these two countries, but I also wanted to sort of get a sense from you about the other conversations, surrounding conversations that perhaps tend to impact bilateral conversations as well.
I was very struck with the tension between bad Muslim, good Indian. And I came to think that maybe the relationship with the stereotypes needs to be read in relation to pairs of opposition in a very structuralist way. And then I ended up thinking, is it a long-term location? I mean, except for British colonial representation like Hungary, I carry in my mind that movie as a very important moment of colonial representation. It usually is the case that the Muslim is the threat and the Hindi is the ally. So let's sort of thinking how deep this is and how is that you deal with those differences, because they seem to be in your presentation solidary. They appear to relate one to each other. And I sort of was thinking, what is it that Hinduism has, or Buddhism, or the Indo-Islamic tradition, that makes the Westerners long for it against against Islam? So what is the difference between the enemy and the exotic? And that led me to something that has to do with the presentation of Christian Hübler. Has to do with something that was very, very, very impressive, because I saw your character dressed, and at the beginning I thought that this was a wild man from the forest, in a kind of representation of the medieval ages of these hairy savages. They're very important in some readings of what happened in the colonial period in the Americas, particularly Roy Bartra's savage against the Europe, because of the question of what is the relationship between the savage in the Middle Ages and the Indians in the 16th century. But I was struck about the image, because how is it that it's read by people that don't know it? I mean, I had never heard about this camouflage. So if I would have seen it, I would have thought a savage. And somehow the position of them is the position of savages, if you understand what I mean. It looks to me that they are not working in a camouflage manner, but they are appearing somehow a little bit in connection with your other work, as if they are immigrants or wild characters. So I just wanted to ask if you had a connection with that image in the work, or is it simply something that is resonance? Thank you.
Very much, Lawrence, for your ideas, for your response. Perhaps general, I think that's important. It is good if it didn't look coherent, but because we are not a group which works together, we just came to work together like since 1 or 2 months. So the point is exactly to see like where we could become like collaborators, and to see like where we could like really complement each other. I think one important point where this could be is exactly on the one hand, at this conflict line of the state as an actor who is implicated in this whole question of art and difference in its own rationale, and also trying to find other ways. I think that will be certainly one. And one thing which might be also interesting is to see what I try to show, and I'm not very sure that this is something which is like generic, is like the question how a public space is like being globalized on the same time where it is defended as national, and how this defines subjects in their way, how they can speak and be public or not. And I don't think that this will be very similar in I don't know from which country you are, but I even see differences between Switzerland and Austria and so on. And the important thing was like to see like especially global capitalism is an important layer to see how difference is commodified and suddenly being appropriated as a language of difference. And I think that the main thing that I try to argue is that there is a very specific tension in the Swiss context of trying to be capitalist and global at the same time being national. So, and this tension of post-colonial anxiety is something which has very much to do with the loss of authority. And this has a lot to do like how citizenship and belonging is like organized as legitimate. So I think that is something which is the important thing I wanted to show as an ethnographic point of view. And one, like when it comes to Bollywood, it was not to say Bollywood was there. The point was that Bollywood was there, but not acknowledged as a specific claim to capitalism, which it was, but rather try to be domesticated as something exotic, something which could be used as a cosmopolitan asset in engaging global markets, or as something which keeps the other domesticated. So I think there is something very specific about the Swiss situation, but I'm happy when you say that it has to be more specified.
What is your own position as you belong? How do you use your own position as part of the minority community?
That's actually an interesting question, but like only shortly there was like, is the presentation still there?
It's closed.
Like what I want to say, actually, I'm totally implicated by that, because somehow I can, and perhaps to the South Asian question, there's no category of South Asian in this context of Switzerland, because it's more about nationality and ethnicity. So South Asian as a category of race is not very present. So it's not like an important category. But can we go to the last? Only shortly. It's exactly the situation, and it's also, it goes to this question of politics of friendship, how to enter this public space, with which alliances, and how can you do it. And so, for example, there was one interesting interview which somebody from like a leading newspaper wanted to make with me, and it was like about 3 questions. It was about, okay, second generation Indians or second generation, how do they enter? Because this is now a huge issue. Second one was like rape in India. Third one was IT Indians. So I talked about all these things. And so it was interesting that I tried to make this the point of like, okay, I'm very anxious about Switzerland because it's my country. So just trying to step into the public and saying, I have a legitimate claim to this country, which like many people like who reacted to that, like in the newspaper say, okay, if you like it in India, go home. So other people would say, okay, somebody's saying it, so we can really change. There's some politics of representation is there. And the third one, which was really interesting, is actually I got an email from a German woman who lives in India who was like applauding me that I was critical about the hype against the media hype about the rape case in Delhi, which I said is like totally oversimplified and just used as a new post-colonial anxious statement to say these people are still savages, you know? So, and this woman, as you can think, she was very RSS close. So it means I was in different public spaces at the same time. So wearing, for example, this Gandhi jacket, Khadi jacket, also would like represent myself as somebody who could be like close to Hindu nationalism. So this is like trying to find a space within these, I think, quite difficult.
I think we are out of time entirely, so we will have to wrap up. We could have 10 seconds. No, it's like the last session, so I think that the question of the camouflage. Yeah, it's the last session, so.
Here's one more. No. The film.
I'm sorry, we'd like to take the camouflage and then we go back. Show the bank video.
The bank you want to see again. No, the camouflage suit, or the camouflage figure, or the McGilly figure, this was the search for, because Zurich is totally surveyed, totally controlled. Every centimeter they control the insect population on the stadium roof of a football stadium. They give them numbers and so everything. So the question was, are there things which still cannot be decoded, where immediately you say this means this means this. So, and the camouflage suit was originally it was that people put grass on their bodies so that the deer doesn't smell them when they were hunting them. So it was first grass, yeah, and then it was further developed together with artists in the military in the First World War, and they developed the suits, and these are still used in military contexts. The Iranian army has hundreds and thousands of the suits wearer, and then it's also now this paramilitary and entertainment sports groups which are performing with these suits and shooting at each other with paintball groups, yeah, with color they shoot. So so it is always developing what it is used for, and for the other thing we were interested that it makes you totally unstable if you do it. So it was not a performance; it was just an infrastructure which we put into the city without an art institution. We just give it in the backyard of a house in a box. And we told some friends, and they told other friends, and so it started the rumor in the city that there is this suit available. And the suit was interesting. I think the most interesting to understand is to wear it yourself, because there happens this image of the savage also, or a fear. Some people really cry and run away, and others just laugh about it, and others still have some fear about terror in the terror age. But the interesting thing is you yourself become very unstable, yeah, because you don't really see, but you are seen by everybody, and the camouflage suit doesn't camouflage because it only camouflage if you have the similar colors behind you. But if you go through with this sand camouflage through the asphalt city, everybody sees you, so you are much more than visible. So you yourself don't see, but then they don't want to see it because they don't understand you. So many don't understand who is it, what is it for, yeah? So this figure is always unstable and always shifting. This we were interested, and we were also interested to give it away so everybody could use it, and also we give it away to other artist groups. And the thing in the bank was very spontaneous, that the Yes Men were there and the Voinar group, and they say, let's clean the bank, because it looks also like a cleaning tool, a glove, yeah. So it's also of being an object, and let's be objects of cleaning objects and clean the bank, the headquarter. And of course, it was not so easy, because if you go with military suits, 15 military suits walk in the bank in the main time. In the main time frame, you don't know what happens, yeah. And the bank becomes clean, yeah. And we learned that they don't see it, yeah. They only see cameras from journalists, yeah.
And maybe terrorists or whatever. She had a question there.
And that the people in the bank are very trained for this, for everything. You see also bank people, so they reacted very trained, very elaborated. Nobody called the police, nobody shoot it. Just hiding the camera and let the bank clean. So they were interested in the service.
Okay. Christoph is organizing sacrificing his right to respond. Thank you.